Hello and welcome back to Stop and Go F1 for this, our driver ratings for the Mexican Grand Prix. The race is in the books. We have a new championship leader, but we still have to give each driver a score between 1 and 10. Remember to give this a like and subscribe before we get going. And a huge thank you to our members: Dakota, the Joyce James, Ron Myers, Steven Strudel, Michael Johnson, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Philip Duganzik, No Edom on Sandwiches, Sarah Joyce, and Andy Jones. If you too would like to become a member, click the link in the description down below, either on YouTube or on Patreon. But let's get into this with the man we always start with. In our favourite ever team, Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber, it is the rookie Gabriele Bortoleto, who qualified for this race in 16th place, but finished in 10th to bring home 1 point for the team. Back-to-back races now in the points for Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber. A wonderful, wonderful job. And yeah, I feel like just giving him a 10, because he scored some points in a car that realistically shouldn't massively be scoring points. I feel like, because Nico, I think, was 8th or 9th, was it, last time out? Not 10th, so maybe I should put a point down. I don't know really what else he could have done. I mean, yeah, I think, you just look at who's ahead of him. You had the two Haas cars, who any other weekend you'd be like, well, maybe they could beat them, but the Haases were on another level this weekend. And you got the Ferraris, the Mercedes, the McLarens, and Max. So realistically, I think that was the best Bortoleto could have done. Got a point? Why not? 10 out of 10 for Bortoleto. Not as good a story for his teammates Nico Hülkenberg. A good qualifying sees him start 13th, but from the opening lap he has an engine issue which just gets worse and worse and worse until he has to just retire the car. So overall gets a DNF on the day. I'm going to give him a 5, and we're going to move on to the Williams team, who also had a bad weekend. Alex Albon, not going well for him as of late. Qualifying was not a good one. He starts the race in 17th place and then ultimately finishes in 12th. For the second race weekend in a row, the Williams team elects to start him on the hard tyres. I can't remember the last time the hard tyre was a viable race tyre. It definitely has not been for the last 2 race weekends. From there, he really just was nowhere. It just didn't work out for Albon. I think realistically 12 was quite a good finish considering, but then when you compare that to, especially in qualifying, the pace that Sainz had, Albon was just nowhere near. Really, last few race weekends have not been the best for Alex Albon. I'm going to give him a 5 as well. We'll move on to Sainz, who had a very good qualifying, starting up in P7, but of course had the 5-place grid penalty to move him down to 12th, and then from there he just got worse and worse and worse. Was involved in an incident into turn 1, which not only gave him some damage on the car, but also damaged the sensors and the electronics of his car as well, from what he was saying in his interview after the race, to the point that when he came into the pits, his pit lane speed limiter was not working, which gave him a penalty. Then he had to pit again, and then the limiter was still not working, which gave him another penalty, and then ultimately the electronics issues got the best of the car, and he had to retire. So he did show some good pace in qualifying. Unfortunately, never got to see that in the race. But, it's one of those weird ones, because now this is back-to-back DNFs for Sainz now. But weirdly, out of both race weekends, I come away from it with quite a positive feeling about Carlos Sainz, because I feel like, yes, the move that he did in Austin on Antonelli was a bit stupid. But the overall verdict for Austin, I thought, was a positive one for him. And again, here, a really good qualifying. And then obviously the race went awfully, but not necessarily his fault. So I still feel relatively positive about Carlos Sainz in the closing stages of this season in the Williams car. I'm gonna give him a 5. By the way, there's a lot of 5s this weekend. I hope you like 5s, because I'm also giving Isaac Hajar a 5. He qualified in 8th place, finished up in 13th, really just went backwards. In his interview afterwards, he seemed to blame it on just the fact that they'd used all their tyres because they'd done so well in qualifying. So everything he was doing in the actual race itself was on used tyres, and he was just struggling with the graining from there. Not great for him, obviously not to score points, then to be beaten by a lot of cars he started in front of. At one point in the race, he was just being overtaken by absolutely everyone. Not great, not dreadful, bang in the middle, 5 out of 10. Across to Liam Lawson now, who's actually a really hard one to mark here. Qualifies in 15th place. Again, is caught up in a turn one incident, hit by one of the Williams cars. Has to come in and change the front wing on the first lap. When he goes back out, nearly runs over 2 marshals. What the hell they were doing there, I'll never know. And then a few laps later, the race itself is over. I mean, not great from Lawson. I was going to say, what could he have done? He could have qualified a hell of a lot better. I think it's going to be a 4 for Lawson. I'd written down a 5, but you can't have so many 5s in a row. Come on now. But yeah, bad qualifying, bad race. But I do feel it wasn't his fault, the turn 1 stuff. But there you go. Hopefully better for both Racing Bulls lads next time out. But my goodness, here he is, Oliver Bearman. Driver of the day on the day, qualifies in P9, finishes up in P4. There was a moment where I thought for sure we were on for the first ever Haas podium. Really gained a lot of positions after the whole Verstappen-Hamilton incident. After Verstappen went for that big dive, wasn't really going to work, comes back onto the track, and then him and Lewis are going wheel to wheel into the next corner. Lewis locks up. Max also misses the corner. When he comes back on, he's fighting Russell. And if you haven't seen the onboard, you've got to go and find this because it's absolutely fantastic. Ollie Bearman just watching Russell and Verstappen fighting, hits a really tight switchback, goes down the inside, double overtake, is wheel to wheel with Verstappen, and just outdrags him. And from there, just had really, really good pace. Ultimately, would be beaten by Verstappen, who went for the 1 stop rather than the 2. In a way, is kind of lucky because Piastri was chasing him down in those final laps before the virtual safety car came out. But even still, the pace that he had, sometimes you see a car like a Haas in a position like 4th, and it's really just, you got quite lucky there, and, people have retired and all this kind of stuff. But Bearman was legitimately there on pure pace. It was a really, really good race from him, and he can be really pleased with himself there. Got a hell of a lot of points for the team and for himself. It's an easy 10 out of 10. Cross to his teammate now, Esteban Ocon, who also finished in the points. He qualified in 11th, finished in 9th, so he got 2 points himself. And you know what? I think this goes to show how good Haas were this weekend because, they had some really difficult strategy calls to make, changing from what looked like a set 1 stop across to the 2. And also what you find as well, when a team like Haas has one driver up in a really high position, their entire focus is on that driver, and the second driver kind of gets forgotten a little bit, and you see him just fall down the order. But that did not happen to Haas this weekend. They pulled off a really good strategy for both drivers, and then, got really, really good points. Jumped up to 8th in the championship now. I'm going to give Ocon an 8. Yeah, still a good score for Ocon, but I feel like just because the gap between him and Bearman was so big, you can't really give him a 10, even though he scored good points. So, 8 out of 10 for Esteban Ocon. Cross to Alpine now, and oh god, it just doesn't get better, does it? I was going to say it gets worse, but realistically it doesn't, because their finishing result was quite good for Alpine, but the only reason it was good was because the amount of cars that didn't finish the race. So, for example, Pierre Gasly in 15th, that's the best finishing result for an Alpine in a feature race since the summer break. Colapinto, though, qualified dead last, finished 16th, which was last of all the finishers. I think they started him on the hard tyre, which, much like Albon, really just did not work. I mean, when you're in a slow car already, putting him on the slowest tyre really doesn't help. And, just didn't work. It's hard to score because, what else are you supposed to do with that dreadful car? It's been a while in Formula 1 since we've had one car that we can point at and go, that is the worst one. At the start of the year, the Alpine was up there in the mix quite a bit, and even last year when Sauber were rubbish, it wasn't like they were finishing last every single race, just most of them. You've got to go back to like maybe 2021 Haas to have a string of form like Alpine are having, where they are just last all the time. But yeah, Colapinto, I mean, what could he do? It's a 5. There you go. And then Pierre Gasly, I think he had quite an interesting race, really, for a race that started in 18th, finished in 15th. They started him on the mediums, then they moved him to the softs really early. I think he had like a 36 lap soft stint, which was the most out of anyone. And the thing was, what we saw this race weekend was that the softs were easily the best tyre of the day, you know, quite more durable than they expected, and the pace was consistent on the tyres. I mean, if you look at Max's times, my God, in that closing soft stint for him, outside of the laps, which are virtual safety car, I think every single one of his laps is within like half a second of each other. In the Alpine, it was a little bit more difficult because it was an Alpine, and they couldn't even get anything out of the soft tyres. When everyone else is on the mediums and struggling, Alpine are on the best tyre available, and they're still struggling because their car is so bad. The good news for Alpine is the season is nearly over. Here's a 5. We move to Lance Stroll now. And an interesting one for Lance where he qualifies 19th, you know, nowhere near good enough, and then finishes up in 14th, realistically just beating the Alpines. And I'm really not too sure on what happened with Lance this weekend because it was a rather anonymous one. At one point when Alonso's issues start to raise their head, they do swap the cars round through team orders before Alonso has to retire. But outside of that, I'm not really sure what happened to Lance Stroll. Thankfully, though, we have got the post-race interviews to watch, and thankfully Lance always gives a deep and insightful answer to what happened to him in the race. So we can watch that now, and that'll give us a bit of insight into what happened to Lance in Mexico. So here we go. This is Lance giving us a bit of insight into what happened to him this race weekend. So thanks to Lance Stroll there for giving us some wonderful insight into what happened there. I think we can fully understand what happened in terms of strategy in the car and everything else there. Real good analysis given, because you know sometimes the drivers, they've just come out of the race, they don't really understand what happened in terms of the entire story of the race, they only understand their point of view, and you know things can get a bit muggled, but not with Stroll. Straightforward answers as always from him. It's a 4. Across to his teammate though, Fernando Alonso, a better qualifying for him, season start the race in 14th place, but yeah, just issues again, and a DNF. Hard to score again. I'm just going to give out another 5 because I haven't got a clue. Cross to Mercedes now, and Kimi Antonelli starts the race from 6th place and finished the race in 6th place. Was another of the benefactors from the kind of Verstappen-Hamilton little battle that happened there. He was able to get past his teammates at that point. That led to the George Russell meltdown. But yeah, from there, had the team orders and was the slower of the two Mercedes cars. But then at the end had the team orders to have the place back, which was what George agreed to initially when he was given the team orders. So realistically, an okay day for Kimi Antonelli. I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. Cross to George, who qualified in 4th place but finished up in 7th. Like I said, bad start for George, and I think he was wrong to say at the start that Max should have given him a position back, because if you look at the replays or look at the images of that 4 wide moment into turn 1, Max is already a mile ahead of George before he even gets to the braking zone. So there's no way on earth that Max had to give that position back to George, because that was already done and dusted from there. He may have had a better argument for receiving the team orders, because it was quite obvious that he was the faster of the two Mercedes cars. And then by the time that they decided to pull off the team orders, he had already been stuck behind for far too long and lost that pace. It's something that we saw Ferrari do earlier this year in Miami, where it just did not work out for him. And it's not very Mercedes-like at all. They normally are on top of these things. Now, Toto Wolff was not at the race this weekend. Does that actually make a difference in terms of decisions like this? Who's to know, but it's worth noting. So for George finishing up in 7th, I think realistically, maybe a podium was on here, at least P4, P5, if Mercedes had done the right thing. But unfortunately, they cost themselves here. I'm going to give George a 7 as well. Just there. I think that's relatively fair. Yuki Tsunoda, very disappointed after the race. He started in 10th, finished up in 11th, which, on paper, obviously doesn't score points, but doesn't look that bad. But realistically, he had a far better race than what that result shows there. At the start of the race, he's keeping Piastri behind really quite well. I think it was like 11 or 12 laps that Piastri was stuck behind Yuki. Then when Yuki comes in for the pits, his pit stop is 15 seconds long. What a huge error there from the Red Bull team. And then, from there it's just fighting back, but finishes up in 11th. Realistically, it should have been maybe 7th, 8th, 9th. It definitely should have been points, but he was let down by the team, unfortunately, to finish in 11th place. It's going to be a 6 out of 10 for Yuki Tsunoda. Cross to his teammate Max Verstappen, who started in 5th, finished in 3rd, and again, really should have been 2nd. Very annoying, that virtual safety car at the end, screwing him over a little bit. And when you see the replays of that, where Sainz basically drives himself off the track. He's in the corner of the stadium section, behind a bit of wall, the slowest part of the entire track. I can understand yellow or double-waved yellow. The fact that went to a full virtual safety car, I will never understand that. Made no sense whatsoever, especially with, Max there closing in on Leclerc. Really should have been 2nd place. We'll have to settle for 3rd. Of course, we'll have to mention some of the other more controversial moments of the race. Going and cutting the grass in turn 1 on lap 1. Personally, I don't think there was any call for a penalty there. I've seen some people who disagree, but he gave the position back to Leclerc. He gave the position back to Hamilton. There was no way he had to give the position back to Russell because he was already past Russell before he went into the corner, like I've already said. But yeah, I don't think there was a penalty call for that one. The other one people have said is the incident between him and Hamilton. And the thing is, that's one where you look at it, and the way that the rules are now in terms of the rules regarding overtaking, he was alongside before the apex, which is what the rule is. There was contact between the two of them. And then when he does cut the corner then and comes back on, I do think he is trying to give the position back to Hamilton, but then he also sees that George Russell is right behind Hamilton. So I think he's trying to maybe find a balance between giving Hamilton the space back whilst also not falling behind Russell, and then Hamilton obviously locks up and carries on through there. So I've seen some people calling for Verstappen to have a penalty at some point in the race. Personally, I don't see it. I do see when people say about Charles Leclerc, but we'll get onto that in a little bit more later on. But yeah, overall, I think for Max, this is actually quite a good race, especially where you see how it started with him on the medium tyres. Everyone else around him on the softs. It becomes incredibly obvious very early on that the medium tyres are not the tyres you want to be on, and the softs are far stronger. But he just makes them last as long as he can, and then goes across to do that 33-lap stint on the softs. And like I said before, incredibly consistent lap times, eating away at Leclerc's lead. And that kind of, in a way, forced a lot of people onto that two-stop because they just saw that he was coming. I was like, right, we got to do something because we're going to lose either way. And that kind of led to them all pitting. And then they just all got out of his way. As I said before, though, a bit screwed over by the virtual safety car, but overall, I think a very good race from him. Still cuts down his lead to the championship leader, now down to 36 points, is it? Between him and Lando now. Since the Dutch Grand Prix, he has cut into the championship lead on an average of 13 points per race at the minute. If he was able to replicate that until the end of the year, 13 points per race, by Abu Dhabi he would be 18 points ahead of Norris or Piastri, whoever it may be, but he'll be 18 points in the lead of the championship if he can continue that momentum, and that's obviously what he's looking to do. Not perfect for Verstappen in terms of results, but I think got the most that he could out of the car with that virtual safety car. Overall, I'm giving him a 10. We're moving on to the Ferraris and Lewis Hamilton, who qualified in third, and it did look like maybe this was finally going to be the one where he got that podium, but unfortunately not. I do think he was very unlucky at the start, because I see no reason as to why Charles Leclerc got away with gaining a position on him. Into turn one, they were wheel to wheel into the corner. Leclerc cut the corner and kept the position. Now again, I've seen some people say, oh, it's because Ferrari didn't report it because Ferrari benefited from it, and I don't think that should be the rule, and I don't think that is the rule. I think it's separate. It should be the stewards and, it's within the FIA. If you cut the corner and gain a position, it doesn't matter if it's your teammate. That position should either be given back or you get a penalty. So I do think Leclerc should have really got a penalty for that. Lewis Hamilton, of course, gets a penalty later on for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. This one was confusing for me, because I think if it had been a 5-second penalty for just gaining the advantage, I would have kind of understood. The 10 seconds seemed very harsh. I watched the SkyPad analysis of this, and what they were saying was that the steward saw it as not only did Lewis cut the corner and gain the advantage, but he also gained a position from Verstappen. Now, like I said, I think Verstappen should and was trying to give Lewis the position back in that point, because Max gained the position through cutting the corner a couple corners beforehand. So I don't think that really holds water at this point. If it had been a 5-second penalty for Lewis, I could have understood a bit more, but then again, Leclerc should have had a penalty for lap one, a whole thing. Penalties aside, though, when he came out of the pit stop and served the penalty, from there on out, had no real pace at all. Never really closed in on the Mercedes cars who were dueling, never closed in on Piastri, never closed in on Verstappen, just had absolutely no pace. While Charles Leclerc was out there on those medium tyres forever, and of course Max was eating away at him, but he still had competitive lap times, Lewis was just nowhere. So even without the penalty, would he have got a podium? I don't think he would have, because his pace at the end of the race was just not there. Overall, though, I think it was decent. I'm giving him a 7. We're moving on to his teammate. And like I said, was very lucky not to get a podium at the start of this race. But outside of that, perfect. Really did the best that he could have. There was no chance he was catching Lando this weekend, because Lando was just in a different stratosphere. But apart from that, was just really, really good. Now, we were denied an opportunity to see how he would have defended against Max, if he could have defended against Max. But again, Charles Leclerc for me is my number 2 on the grid. If I was to rate everyone from best to worst, I put Max number 1 as the best. I'm putting Leclerc at number 2. I think the fact that he's got so many podiums out of that Ferrari car, which has been absolutely nowhere, and that incredible pole in Hungary, just shows how good he is. He is a real talent, and there is a chance that he could go throughout his entire career and not become a world champion, and I think that would be absolutely devastating, because he is just so good. His one-lap pace is arguably the best on the entire grid, and now his race pace is catching up to that as well. You give him, if Ferrari next year have a car that is capable of competing for a world title, Charles Leclerc will be the world champion, because he's just incredible. He's so good, and the last few races have just shown that. Great in Austin, fighting against Lando in a far better car, and then really good here on the one stop, made it work Obviously, was a bit lucky with the virtual safety car, but overall, just a great race from him. A 10 out of 10 for Charles Leclerc. We go across now to our final team, the McLarens. Starting with Oscar Piastri, who I think this was, I was going to say a weekend of two halves, but not even that. It was really like a weekend of 4/5 versus a fifth. Qualifying, dreadful. Race start, dreadful. First stint, dreadful. Second stint, dreadful. Final stint on the softs, fantastic. That's how Oscar's race weekend went. Obviously, qualifying, not good. 7th place. Looking back at his history at this track, he doesn't like it. He's never gone well here, and that continued this weekend. Race start was bad, lost positions, got stuck behind Yuki for like 12 laps. From there, fought back a little bit, went across to the medium tyres, was on the back of the Mercedes, but couldn't really get them because there was a bit of a DRS train going on. But then, that stint at the end on the softs was the Oscar Piastri that we've had for the majority of this season. The overtake he did immediately on Ocon. Now, of course, Ocon was on all the tyres in a slower car. But, Piastri went for not a popular overtaking place to get past him, just to make sure there wasn't a car between him and George Russell at any point in that race. Really good stuff from there. Chased and beat both Mercedes cars, was chasing down Behrman at the end, much like Verstappen, got screwed over a little bit by the virtual safety car. If he got past Behrman, he'd still be our championship leader right now. Unfortunately, he is not, but a good finish to what had been a dreadful weekend for Oscar Piastri to finish up in a semi-respectable P5. I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10 and hope to God that when we come back in 2 weeks' time, we see the Oscar Piastri that we've seen for the majority of this race, not the Oscar Piastri we've seen since the summer break, because only 1 point in it, and he can still win this for sure. And finally, Lando Norris. Well, the greatest pole lap he has ever done in his career, to give him pole position. Fantastic stuff. It could have all nearly ended into turn 1. There was a slight tap between him and Lewis Hamilton, but managed to get from there, kept the lead, and kept the lead for every single lap. Won the race by the biggest winning margin we have seen all year. Misses out on the Grand Slam because he did not get the fastest lap. I believe this is the 3rd time in his career that he's missed out on a Grand Slam by just not getting the fastest lap. But apart from that, it is practically perfect. Of course, I can't give him a 10 though, because he didn't wear the sombrero on the podium, which, I think shows more about him than it does anyone else. If you got a sombrero there, you got to wear it. Have some fun. So it is a 2 out of 10 for Lando Norris. Unfortunately, it's all I can do because he didn't wear the sombrero. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Okay, it's a 10. It's a 10 out of 10. Perfect. I honestly, it's weird because last week we were talking about his race in Austin, and I said that was his best race weekend of the year. Despite the fact that he didn't win, he showed maturity, he showed intelligence, he showed he was a great racing driver. This weekend, not only is this his best race weekend of the year, this is the best race weekend he's ever had in his career. An incredible pole lap, incredible race, just absolutely untouchable. I said it yesterday. If you cast your mind back to the Australian Grand Prix, when he won that race, Martin Brundle on commentary said that was a race of a champion. And at the time, I remember watching it going, I'm not too sure. It was a great win, he did very well, but race of a champion's I think it's a bit too far. What we saw this weekend was 100% the race of a champion. It was Max Verstappen-esque, just utter domination. There wasn't a second of the race I thought Lando Norris was not going to win. He was just out there. And if that Lando Norris turns up for the remaining 4 races, you can stop talking about title fight because the title will be over before we even get to Qatar. If that level of Lando Norris turns up, every single race weekend before the end of the year, because that was just exceptional. Perfect from Lando Norris. That is our driver ratings for the Mexican Grand Prix. It is 10s for Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, Ollie Behrman, and Gabriel Bortoleto. Lowest scores of the weekend go to Lance Stroll and Liam Lawson with 4s. We're back in 2 weeks' time for the Brazilian Grand Prix sprint race, but between now and then, on Friday, we have one of my favourite videos I've made all year as I search for the worst Formula 1 pole position of all time. And on Wednesday, as always, we have the Wednesday Fun Club. All that to come in the next week. Until then, I will see you later. Have a good one. Goodbye.